Hello and welcome to episode 25 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I am your host. Today's episode is Charlie Rosen, multi-instrumentalist and Tony Award nominee at just 30 years old. Charlie's work could not possibly be limited to just one or two projects. His work stretches from big band to Broadway, video games, film, television, commercial projects. You name it, Charlie's probably involved in it. He's a vastly talented guy and super sweet, just very, very nice. And it makes me want to support his projects all the more for it. And it has made for one of my favorite conversations on the show thus far. So in this episode, we talk about Charlie's linear career, how that has led from one project to the next, seemingly just directly influencing one to the other. The rising popularity of video game music and the multi-genre connection that it has with its audiences, and a gig from hell that takes dedication to a shocking new level. So in this episode, we also talk about at the end where he plugs the third upcoming record for the 8-Bit Big Band, one of his projects, which is called Backwards Compatible. That'll be releasing on January the 8th, so just after the new year. And the live stream release show for that he also plugs, unfortunately has been postponed due to everything going on with health and safety regulations. Of course, that is at the forefront of Charlie's concerns. So he has postponed that to May the 1st of 2021. And even though it's a little further out, it's not that far away, and I promise it's going to be worth the wait. So if you want to go and get tickets to that, you can go over to the8bitbigband.com or go over to their Instagram at the8bitbigband and get a little bit more information on that show. It's all over their social media and websites, so you can easily find it. And then, of course, moving on to the releases of the week, the next one comes from the 8-Bit Big Band as well. Got to practice that one several times. And it's called the KK Sessions, which is their Animal Crossing EP. That released in July of 2020, so right in the middle of the pandemic. Although, if you were just listening to it, you'd never know that it was something where they all sent in their tracks. It is mixed and mastered so well, and the playing is just so tight. The band is amazing. And it's a playful, nostalgic, and absolute blast of a way to spend 15 minutes. Before you know it, it's already over, and if you're like me, you'll probably just hit, replay and listen to it several more times over in a row, and just get something new from it each time. And what Charlie does with reimagining and expanding these tunes, and all the tunes he does for the 8-Bit Big Band, gotta write that time, it just makes me grin from ear to ear, and it's everything I wanted and didn't know that I needed in the year 2020. Amongst all the crazy stuff that's happening, this is a bright light, just bringing some stuff to look forward to. So the second release of the week comes from Benny Benack III and the Stephen Feifke Big Band. This is called Seasons Swingin' Greetings. It came out in 2019, so we're coming up on the year anniversary of it, and it features Christmas and Hanukkah classics, all around holiday favorites, and the tune that you're hearing right now, a comical original from Stephen and Benny called My Girlfriend is an Elf. So if you want to check out these charts for yourself, Stephen is actually selling the Big Band charts on StephenFeifkeBigBand.com. And then if you want to go and support this release directly, you can go to StephenFeifkeBigBand.bandcamp.com and you can purchase that there. And the same thing with the 8-Bit Big Band. If you want to go to the 8bitbigband.bandcamp.com, you can purchase the KK Sessions, which is based on the character of KK Slider from Animal Crossing. I haven't yet played the game. I know I'm behind the curve. Switches are just sold out everywhere, but as soon as I can, I'll make sure to be more educated on the music that I'm listening to for the thematic, subject material. So anyways, go and make sure to follow all of those guys. Go follow Stephen Feifke on Instagram. We put his handle down below. Go follow Charlie down below again, and the 8-Bit Big Band's Instagram handle as well. So, moving on to the Monk shows of this week before we get into today's episode. Again, Monk's Jazz Club, a club that was previously a pop-up and now is a brick and mortar during the pandemic. Colin Shook curating the shows over there, several shows a month, or a week even. I think he's got like 3 or 4 shows a week that happen, just really churning them out, and they're all of the utmost highest quality. So go and support those shows, donate to the musicians if you can. They always have their PayPal and on their Venmo and like Cash App and all those different things in the corner. The first one that we have coming up is actually tonight, December 17th. That's Thursday at 7:30. It is John Mark Piper, who is a vibraphone player, which I am a sucker for vibraphone. I love it so much. And he's going to be playing with the Colin Shook Trio. The next show is going to be on Saturday, December 19th, a very cool duo concert that's going to be happening. It's going to be the Brandon and Red Show, which is Brandon Temple on drums and Red Young returning to the Monk stage on his Hammond organ. So tune into that December 19th, Saturday at 7:30. And then the next one is the Austin Jazz Society continuation of their Project Safety Net show series for the fundraiser concerts. Again, Project Safety Net is an amazing thing that Austin Jazz Society is doing to take care of some of the most vulnerable jazz musicians right now in the Austin city limits, as we're just kind of waiting to get on the other side of this thing so we can go back to the full-time occupation of playing in the clubs, playing in restaurants, all of those good stuff. So the next concert for that fundraiser series is Mitch Watkins and Diane Donovan. That is Tuesday, December 22nd. Make sure to tune in there and make a charitable donation if you would like to. Again, coming up on the end of the year, I'm pretty sure you could write that off your taxes, and this would be a good year to do it. So, and then of course, after Christmas on December 27th, you're going to have the Brandon Guerra Quartet on December 27th. That's Sunday at 7:30. Brandon Guerra, the house drummer down at Jazz Texas, which is Doc Watkins' establishment, who was our guest a couple weeks back. Make sure to tune into those and support the musicians if you can. So let's get into today's episode. That's all the announcements that we have. This is episode 25, a quarter of the way to 100. Can't believe we're already there. So excited to just keep these going every week. And yeah, episode 25, Charlie Rosen. This is Off the Bandstand. Thank you so much for taking the time, and congratulations, man, again on the Tony nomination. That is
thanks, dude. Yeah, it's very cool. It's yeah, it's crazy. It's kind of hard to believe, and it feels particularly weirdly unreal this year because like there wasn't really any Tonys. You know, it's just so strange. It's a strange time to become a Tony nominee because normally it's like it happens and then there's all these like events leading up to the main event and there's all these things you have to do and like luncheons and all this stuff and you get certificates and all this really cool shit to be like, oh, look at all these things I now have to do because it happened. And this year it's like, you're a Tony nominee. That's it.
That's it. Yeah. Cool. For sure.
I mean, it's an honor. It's an honor nonetheless, but it's a very, very strange year to be a Tony nominee.
Of course. And it almost feels like, I mean, of course, we want to make sure to like give attention to all these shows and in the general sense of Tonys in general, but at the same time, it's like for a multitude of reasons that, you know, we don't nearly have the time to go into. It's like kind of like, well, what are we celebrating exactly? Of course, we want to give that attention to Broadway and you know, highlight the fact that it's like, yeah, there's all this work that was put into making these shows happen, and then the rug was kind of pulled out from under us. But you're right, it's a very weird time to feel celebratory for some reason.
My opinion on that is like, that is so true, and a lot of people are like, why are we even doing this? You know, like it's not the time to have an award show, which like I inherently agree with. Of course, there's like more important things going on. The thing of it is, it's like we need to close the chapter on these shows that were eligible. There's only 3 musicals were eligible, but if we don't close the book on them right now until we can do the Tonys again, then they'll be lumped into the next time they're
sure.
And it's like then it really won't be fair for those shows because it's like they've been around for 2 years but they haven't been open. Right. So we just kind of have to like be like, okay, this happened. We're doing this Tonys. They still haven't announced when it even is, but we have to just get it. We have to like put this behind us so we can like start fresh whenever that is, and in 2053 when we're reopened. So, thanks.
For sure. Well, man, like and again, this show I kind of said in the email is, I don't even like to really call it a show. I just think of it as like, okay, it's two musicians having a conversation, and hopefully the audience is just a fly on the wall, very like informal. But I do want to touch on some of the things like specific to your like your credits and such, because whenever I went to your website and was kind of looking at the resume that you have on there, it was staggering that I was just like, okay, surely the guy in the picture does not match the guy with all the credits, because of the fact that like for you to have as many credits as you do, usually people are more in like their 40s and
Right.
such, but to have accomplished like so much at like from what I think to be a young age, like I don't know exactly how old you are, but
30, quarantine 30.
you're 30. So that's like an incredible accomplishment. So like, how does that feel with like all the different projects that you've done on like Broadway and off Broadway stuff, and then to have it kind of like culminating, or not culminating, but at least a checkpoint at the Moulin Rouge
Right.
accolade?
Yeah, I mean, let's see. Ask that question one more time. Give you a chance to practice.
Yeah. With the progression of those musicals, doing stuff like American Psycho, and then working on stuff like Be More Chill, and then stuff at the Lyceum Theater, how does it feel that like Moulin Rouge, does that feel like it's like a next step up of like the projects that you've been working on? Or does it just feel like a continuation?
Yeah, I mean, it has been very fast, admittedly. Like this, I moved to New York 10 years ago, basically, and from my perspective, it does feel like a completely linear journey. Mm-hmm. Every gig I've gotten, I can attribute to a gig that I had gotten before. So it feels to me like the steps to which I got to this Tony nomination, the relationships that I made that got me to this point, the shows that I worked on that got me to this point, the side projects I had started doing to showcase my abilities to get me to this point, all feel like very linear stepping stones to me. And there have, with minimal setbacks, of course, there are always setbacks and things always do go wrong. And but it does feel like a pretty linear journey. That being said, I admit that for that journey to take 10 years is accelerated.
Sure.
But it's hard to say, because from my individual perspective, it feels normal. But that's just like, it's sort of like, I don't know, there must be some sort of psychological term for that.
Sure.
Like confirmation bias. That's not it, but there is something like that,
Yeah.
To me, it feels normal, but it is fast. I can admit objectively that is a really fast journey.
Sure. But of course, nonetheless, I don't want to give any indication that it's not at all deserving in that small amount of time. I mean, obviously, anyone can listen to the work that you've done with 8-Bit Big Band or any of the orchestration stuff that you've done and just think like, oh my God, yeah, this is it. Like this, there's a very like real feeling I think that people have when they listen to stuff where they can just pick up on like, oh, this is official, like this is legit.
Right.
And I think that like the work that you've done is very much that, where it's just like there's no question about like, oh, were they still trying to figure stuff out? It feels like you have arrived at a very like specific thing that is like, no, this is the sounds that I want to create, and it is at like the utmost highest level, which obviously is representative of the opportunities that you've had. So being in New York, what was that like? Where did you come up, and then how did you get to New York?
Right. Well, I moved to New York in 2008, on the cusp of 2009, to work on a musical called 13 the Musical. And the gimmick of that musical is that it had an all teenage cast, and it also had an all teenage like orchestra. And I used the word orchestra like in a loose term. It was a 6-piece band. Sure. But that started in Los Angeles regionally while I was in high school. And so I did that when I was a sophomore in high school in its workshop phase. And then when I was a junior in high school, they produced it properly in a theater in LA. But I got that gig because I got a flyer that was like, we need teenage musicians for this musical. And I only got that big gig because the Music Center of Los Angeles, which is part of Center Theater Group, who produced the show, they do this scholarship called the Spotlight Awards. That's like a jazz scholarship for young people that I had auditioned for as a bass player and like didn't get. Like I got past like one round. Sure. But they just sent like a totally blanket email to all the kids who had auditioned to be like, come, we need you for this musical.
Yeah.
And so I auditioned and I got that show. And then that inevitably was the thing. So I did that sophomore and junior year of high school. And then senior year of high school, that same theater company produced another show called Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson in LA. And they were like, we need a bass player. Do you want to come like audition to be a bass player? And I did. And that wasn't there was no teenagers in that show. I just went in as a 17-year-old and was like, I'll play the bass.
Sure.
And the director of that show, I think, was weirdly into the idea of like, oh, it'd be really like sort of cool and unusual to have this 17-year-old bass player. It was because the band was on stage, and so it's like to see this actual like kid, because it was kind of like this punk rock show, and so he was into that. So I did that. But in both of those shows, both transferred to Broadway a year apart from each other, and also weirdly in the same theater. So one was in 2008 and one was off Broadway in 2009, then on Broadway in 2010. And so like within the first 3 years of moving to New York, luckily I had just chosen the right gigs that like were both on Broadway. And that was this huge foot in the door into the Broadway world, which previously I didn't really know I was going to be doing that. I was just playing music. And then that was really a solid foot in the door into that world. And then, you know, once I started doing that, I just started trying to get the word out there to like all these young theater writers that I was meeting, that I would like, I'll do your horn arrangements for free. And if you like them, like whatever, we'll keep working together. You know, I'll do like, you don't have any sheet music, like I'll make sheet music for you. I'll make some rhythm section charts. I'll do a piano vocal score. I'll do like whatever. I'll just do it. You know, and that started getting the word out that I had these abilities to do these things. And then just like one by one, I started working with more and more young theater artists on their albums and their concerts and playing them, eventually music directing them. And then like maybe around 2020, let's see, I don't know. I would have been like, how old am I? No, not even 2014, like around there, 2013, 2014, I started another big band called the Broadway Big Band, which is like a big band that plays all songs from musicals, which is a, you know, thing traditionally that jazz is all these songs from musicals. But I was, you know, also drawing from things that were not considered like jazz standards, you know, like Sondheim shows, all sorts of whatever, Broadway stuff. And I had made enough contacts from Broadway singers that they would come and sing in this band. And we ended up getting a residency at a venue called 54 Below. And then that was a thing I could be like, this is my thing. And now I'm just going to email as many professional theater artists as I know that I think would be interested in this and have them come here so they could be like, oh, this guy has these chops. He can do this. Like he has these large ensemble chops. He knows his Broadway stuff. He knows his arranging, you know, like large ensemble arranging. And then that, you know, helped push the envelope forward while still being called. I also play like a ton of weird instruments. So I'd be called to play these unique instruments and pits. Like I played the zither in one, and, you know, doubling on all sorts of string instruments and all sorts of weird stuff. You know, so just little by little, and then I was becoming like an associate MD on shows because I had these, like American Psycho, I was the associate MD on because I had these Ableton chops and the whole show was electronic music. So I could help them program and maintain Ableton. So it really just is a matter of like having as diverse of a palette of skills as I possibly can, so that when the time comes when they're like, oh, we need somebody who can play the guitar and keyboard and run Ableton, and maybe do some horn arrangements. You know, it's like, oh, I know that guy, you know? And so it just sort of like, you know, trickled outward from there. And so getting to Moulin Rouge, the funny thing about that is the director of that show was the director from when I was 17 who called me to play the bass in that show. It's the same director.
Wow. Okay.
Same guy. And that music director, when I first started working on that show at 17, it was a different music director. But when that show moved to New York, they hired this other music director named Justin Levine, who ended up being the music supervisor on Moulin Rouge as well. So they sort of were like, oh, we should definitely call Charlie. We know he's got these horn chops. We like working with him. We've known him for 10 years since he was literally in high school. So it's just like planted, all these seeds planted that like at the right times were just like popping up to create this path, you know?
Yeah, man. Wow, that was all super great. I'm curious, like going back to the beginning of that, like kind of musicians in general are told very, very often, like diversify yourself as much as possible, to your point, so that way you are the one that people want to call. But most musicians, especially in high school, are really just starting to get a handle and an understanding of their instrument, much less, you know, things like getting familiar with Ableton or writing charts or knowing the music theory enough to be able to write charts or navigate those programs, whether it's any of those music notation software programs. So when did you start doing, I have a few questions, but when did you start doing like the music notation stuff? And how did that make its way into your...
That's a result of just sort of like, I guess, my always being fascinated with computers and technology. When and I was like 12 or 13, I remember downloading a pirated version of Finale on LimeWire
Yeah.
and being like, oh my God, I could finally like write out my own music. Like, this is amazing. And so just like fooling around with that. And then of course the first Mac laptop I ever bought had GarageBand on it. And so that was like, entry into music software. And also I was lucky to go to an arts high school that had an electronic music program where we like learned how to use Logic and Reason and like sequence stuff and like audio music technologies. The thing about all of that is like I can admit in retrospect that like I'm very privileged to be able to say all of those things. You know what I mean? Like, luckily I had those opportunities afforded to me, and that's pretty unusual. And I was lucky, and not everybody is going to have access to that stuff.
Sure.
And also, in and of itself, instruments are expensive. You have one instrument provided you from the school. How are you expected? Like, you're a sax player. You're not going to go buy, if you're in high school, you're probably not going to go buy a flute or a clarinet.
Sure.
Unless your parents are also musicians, which mine were, which is rare. So I admit that like I'm the product of ability and privilege and time, but the thing about all that, as I say, is like, yes, we should diversify as much as you can. Like, if you play sax, try and play other horns if you're able to. Try and use the computer if you have the means and you're able to. But there's other things that you can be doing that don't involve anything physical that I think I always tell high schoolers to practice. Is it's like having, even within your one instrument, knowing all the possible genres of music that instrument can be used in, and what that means. Like, what if you're a horn player, like what are the articulation and the phrasing styles of all the genres of music that use the saxophone? Sure. You know what I mean? Drummers, rhythm section players, even more, like so many. So like knowing those things, and then like learning when to use the vocabulary in those styles, and then also like being able to be a collaborative person in a group setting. Those are things that like don't cost any money.
Right.
And if you have any kind of device whatsoever, it means you have access to YouTube. So you can go down, or Spotify or whatever, you can go down rabbit holes of genre and style for any instrument and learn all the different ways that you can play that instrument. So even if all you do is play the piano, or all you do is play the sax, you can be like, oh, this song is like a classic lead alto big band sax playing. This is like smooth. This is like pop SNL sax playing. This is like whatever, so that's a skill that like just takes your ears and your brain and your one instrument. So diversifying doesn't necessarily mean like acquiring a bunch of stuff or programs, which is also important, but like even with one instrument, there's tons and tons of things you can pick up on musicianship wise that are equally as important.
Yeah. What was your first instrument that you like started playing around on?
I started piano when I was 3.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what were the instruments of your parents as well?
My mom is a woodwind doubler,
okay,
but her main instrument is bassoon.
Okay.
And then my dad is a keyboardist, I would say, but his main instrument is pipe organ, like the theater organ. So like he accompanies silent movies on the pipe organ. We have a pipe organ in my house in LA.
Cool.
Yeah. So, but he also plays piano and, Hammond, and he also was really into bluegrass banjo and guitar, and would play accordion and just sort of all things keyboard and a little bit of everything,
Sure. It feels like, obviously, with stuff with the Broadway Big Band and 8-Bit Big Band, which we'll get into, that there's very much like, not at all the pigeonhole, but it feels like there is a jazz center, or at least a feeling of home with jazz and all the people that you're surrounded with like Stephen Feifke and Benny Benack and Dan Chmielewski, who we've had on this show. But did you feel like whenever you were starting piano and then starting to pick up other instruments as well, did you feel like there was a little bit more of a traditional classical sense of that linear learning, or did you feel like you were more adept to jazz and that kind of jazz idiom early on?
Yeah, definitely that. I mean, I was not a very disciplined practicer when I was a kid. I had to be really forced to practice by my parents, which I hated at the time. And now I'm glad, but I never really did sort of like a traditional classical education. All of it was like, most of my early music training was like ear training with my dad. We both had perfect pitch. So we'd like sit and play like ear training games where it was like my dad would play a phrase on the organ, and I would make up a like an answer phrase on the piano.
Sure.
So it was more like, and then, I took some piano lessons as a kid that were like whatever traditional piano lessons are. I guess they're classical, but they're really just like anything to get you going. And I took some flute lessons, I guess, which would be classical, and cello when I was a kid. But then when I was 10, I was starting to get into like playing in bands. And so I was learning guitar and bass and playing drums in bands, and just sort of like following my nose of whatever instrument I was into and doing it all by ear, and
Yeah.
and listening to jazz. I mean, my dad only listens to jazz, primarily mostly, things recorded before 1940, like just really traditional stuff.
Sure.
And my mom plays classical, so I had that stuff around. But it wasn't until I got into high school where I was like playing in big band. Actually, I was the drummer in my high school big band, where I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. And it's been around me, and now I like have interest in it because my peers are into it and I'm now into it. And so that, I think, because of my experience playing in high school big band, like that was the thing that was really like, oh, I want to arrange in this style, like this is where I found home. But because I grew up playing in like bands and ska bands and punk bands and whatever, and like, like being into like, me and my friends listening to hip hop or whatever it is, like electronic music and all that stuff just sort of like now filters through my home vehicle, which is like big band or large ensemble stuff,
Well, did you grow up in Los Angeles proper, or like around that area?
I grew up in the Valley, but I went to Hamilton High School, which is like in Los Angeles, and they have a performing arts academy.
Yeah. Did you ever play any woodwind or brass instruments as well?
Yeah, so I took flute lessons when I was a kid, and all these woodwinds were around, so I would just like pick them up. I played clarinet. I still play a lot of clarinet, actually, especially in lockdown. I'm producing a ton of tracks, so I play a lot of clarinet on stuff. I've played sax. I've done a couple of gigs on sax. If I really need to, I have to shed my ass off, but I do them.
Sure.
I played a lot of sax in high school as well. And then I play a ton of brass stuff now too. I mean, I've sort of always been like sort of into trumpet. I'm not like the most amazing trumpet player, but good enough to make like a solid demo. And with the help of Melodyne, I sound decent. And then I bought a French horn about a year ago, so I've been getting pretty into that. And trombone, and I have a tuba. I just sort of like acquire these things so that I can know. I use them to record with all the time, really all the time. But mostly I just really like learning new instruments, and also as an arranger, the experience you get from actually physically being with the horn and knowing how it works, knowing what feels good, knowing what's hard about it, knowing what's easy about it, even at my low level, is like the amount that translates into better writing is like night and day. It's invaluable.
All of those questions were kind of leading up to, because like at the beginning you were saying, oh yeah, I was like learning piano and then like doing some flute stuff. And then as time was going by, you were like bass and then drums. And I was like, okay, well, like surely, obviously that's where he has this like really great firsthand account and idea of like how to be writing for all these different instruments. And that's why I was asking about the brass and woodwind too, because I know for some people there is sometimes a small learning curve and sometimes a really huge learning curve on writing for registers, like for all these different instruments, and knowing like what is going to sound good, because you can have like all these different notes spread out a bunch of different instruments, but if they're not in the right instruments and they're not in the right register, it's just not going to translate. So that's why I was asking, and I'm sure people listening to this, their heads are just exploding, because it's like, yeah, and then I picked up this and this and this, and I bought a French horn, which like French horn being, I would say arguably one of the more temperamental.
That one is, I've been wanting to get into that for a while, because it's sort of like the mysterious beast of brass. And I just wanted to be like, every time I write for it before I got one, I was like, is this what this does? Is this its job? What is its job in jazz, in orchestral crossover writing? Like, I know what I hear, but I just don't know what it feels like to be writing all these like high sweeping notes and then have to play these low notes, which, I just didn't know. And now I know, because of the way the mouthpiece is, and it's just a different animal, and it has a different job.
Yeah, for sure. Specifically with like the time off in the pandemic, I think a lot of us have said like, in one way, it was like a welcomed break, because like working musicians are constantly, feels like we're only in our apartment so we can sleep and maybe get something to eat, and it's like right back out. But like with doing all the stuff like Be More Chill, American Psycho, doing some stuff on Marvelous Miss Maisel, which I'm also very intrigued to hear about. That was a beginning of the pandemic binge which also feels so weird because, you know, I was like, oh yeah, I watched Marvelous Miss Maisel so long ago. And I was like, it was March. And yes, that was a long time ago, but relatively it's not that long.
I
So
know,
like
it feels like forever ago.
time
Yeah.
is weird right now.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
all these different things that you're running back and forth to, how did you feel about, you know, when the pandemic started? Like, did you feel like, okay, finally, maybe I can get to work on some of the other things that I wasn't able to work on because of my schedule?
Mostly it was like, oh, well, I mean, my life right before the pandemic was truly, truly insane, like working harder than I had ever worked and didn't even really realize it. And so the couple months, maybe 1 or 2 months of the pandemic were a sort of welcome break from the like chaos that I had been subjecting myself to. Lucky
Sure.
chaos, all good stuff, but just like, just too much.
Yeah.
And so I was just playing a ton of video games, honestly.
Yeah.
But then after like 2 months go by, you're like, okay, I need to do something. We need to get back on this. And so like, that's when I started recording some virtual stuff with the 8-Bit Big Band. I was like, okay, I'm going to make an EP, virtual EP with, you know, I just want to find stuff to do. And also, because I have all these recording skills and I play all these different instruments, a lot of various sort of organizations were doing these benefits and galas, virtual events, virtual concerts. And so I've been getting hit up a lot to produce tracks for all of these streams that people in the Broadway world will sing along to. So that's kept me pretty busy over the past 6 months, you know?
Yeah. Growing up, did you find that like Broadway musicals and Broadway shows, whether they were like classic golden age or more modern things at the time, I should say, did you feel like that was something that was very much around you in the house?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Honestly, yes and no. I mean, my parents being musicians of the generation they were like, you know, familiar with like all the sort of classic musicals and like Fiddler on the Roof and The Sound of Music and Music Man, you know, and all these things. My mom was a music teacher and they would do a show. But
Sure.
I wouldn't say that like my family is like a huge Broadway family. They were as into theater as I guess any other sort of, you know, boomer generation family
Sure.
was, you know, and I wasn't like immediately drawn to it or whatever. It's sort of like my theater education really came as a result of me falling into the thing. And also, honestly, most of my current theater vocabulary comes from the Broadway Big Band in that I started doing it with a director named Max Friedman, who is an encyclopedia of theater.
Sure.
And I would be like, I need more music to arrange. I don't really know anything other than the most famous shows. And he'd be like, oh, you should check out this super deep cut Candor and Ebb musical. Or you should check out this really obscure Sondheim show that people love. You know, so he was the one who was like opening me up to all these new, you know, things within the theater world are sort of considered like, well, you have to know this if you want to be a theater artist.
Sure.
But I didn't at the time. And now like, you know, now and there's always people who are going to know more about Sondheim than I do. But I'd say now I know more about Sondheim than I did when I was 18, you know?
Yeah, right. The reason why I was asking too was because of the fact, like the Broadway Big Band, right, and taking more things. Because my introduction to jazz was not even like a formal introduction to jazz. It was just that my my mother is a choreographer, and she is very involved in community theater in Lake Jackson, my hometown,
Cool.
just south of Houston. And so our family was immediately immersed, and she had been her whole life, but me and my brother immediately immersed into the musical theater world. And I was basically learning through all these golden age musicals a lot of the Great American Songbook.
Right.
It wasn't until I was in my teens that I was figuring out, you know, the first group that I ever saw was Take Six. And that is maybe one of the best like introductions to like jazz harmony, right? Because I was just like, whoa, I don't know what this is, but I'm so curious to find out. And then I started to go back in discography, and then, you know, Take Six led me to New York Voices, which led me to Manhattan Transfer, which then led me as a trumpet player in high school to listen to more jazz musicians, like just like specifically that. And so I was starting to get an idea that it was like, oh, these are pretty connected, obviously because it was the popular music of the time. Right. But I think that the Broadway Big Band is a really cool take an avenue of taking those tunes that are not necessarily the Great American Songbook tunes that are not already
Right.
taken for granted, and then putting more things into that space.
Right.
Like I really like the Cyril Emmy's Move On, the Stephen Sondheim adventure record,
Mm.
because she's taking tunes from Sunday in the Park with George. She's
Right.
taking tunes from Sweeney Todd, like all of these, amazing Sondheim Into the Woods, and then putting it into the jazz idiom as
Right.
well. So was it always like an idea that you were like, okay, I just want to go with like the B sides and like all the C and D list Broadway tunes?
Right. It's like half and half. We do some that are like very, very well known, and then we do some that are like really for the real theater heads. So that wasn't always the idea. I didn't actually go into it with any particular idea, but that's what it really ended up being. Mostly the idea to do it was just that I sort of looked around and was like, well, and I grew up listening to all these big bands that are associated with like these clubs. It's like the Birdland Big Band, the Vanguard,
Yeah.
all these famous big bands that used to have like homes in New York City. And it sort of seemed like it's weird that Broadway community doesn't have like a big band associated with it that is like the thing to do after your show at 11:30 is like, go see this big band. You know what I mean?
Right.
And maybe it once did a long time ago, but it didn't when I was looking around. So
Sure.
that was the reason I was sort of like, oh, this would be a really cool thing to do. It's sort of like a big band to call its own.
Yeah.
And so that's why I started doing it. And also I had a collection of 4 or 5 Broadway charts, because when I was in college, my girlfriend at the time was a singer in musical theater, and we were like, oh, let's like make a little EP of your favorite theater tunes, and I'll arrange them for big band.
Very
So
cool.
I had that to start with, and that was the seed of the idea, and it just sort of like grew out from there.
Yeah. To go on to the video game side of things, you were like, yeah, at the beginning, like I was playing a lot of video games. What video games are you playing? Just out of curiosity.
I was playing a ton of like a lot of indie games, which I think are like a really exciting avenue of video games, and also a bunch of sort of like just like lesser known but really popular games in the gaming community. People are like, oh well, you have to play X, Y, or Z. Like I played No Man's Sky, Subnautica, Outer Wilds is this incredible indie game that I loved, and then like Persona, which I never played Persona. People were like, you have to play Persona 5. I did. Really cool soundtrack. Let's see what else. Oh, some other like a lot of Animal Crossing, of course. We were playing a lot of Animal Crossing. We played so many games. It was such a blur. It's hard to even remember.
Yeah.
lots of Mario, and then getting caught up on some Mario games. I think we revisited Super Mario Odyssey. A lot of Mario Kart. We played Stardew Valley, which is like a great, like a Harvest Moon-esque game. Ring Fit Adventure. Do you know about that game?
I don't.
It's a game where like it's hard actually. It comes with like a Pilates ring controller, and it's sold out during quarantine because what you do is like it's an RPG, but you travel through the game, and to like beat bosses and enemies, you like do exercises. So it'll be like you have to like do 50 squats, and it has like a sensor on your leg, and it can tell when you're doing them right. Or it'll be like plank for 3 minutes to like do damage to 5 people, or like do this yoga move and you'll restore health. And it has these sensors, so it can really tell like where your body is. It's pretty cool.
But that's kind of the best of both worlds of an incentive of like a workout program, and also
Exactly.
Because that's the thing too, is like gamers, like diehard gamers are really competitive. So it's kind of like, whereas no, I don't want to go exercise. It's like now it's like no, I'm gonna beat this boss, so I have to do it.
Boss. Yeah. And like, I'm trying to remember other like Dragon Quest. Played some Dragon Quest games. What are other? There's a couple like famous must-play games that I'm forgetting. They all really just blur together over the course of the last 6 months.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was curious too, like over whenever you are playing video games recreationally, when you have the time, is it more, and this is leading into 8-bit, but do you try to play more like newer gen consoles, or do you have like an array of the older like NES and 64 and Sega Dreamcast and stuff like that?
I have both. I mean, I have my N64, and then I have a ton of emulators that sometimes I dip into. But I'm trying to stay current. I have a Switch and a PS4, so it's mostly like what cool, what amazing indie games have been being developed that are like pushing the boundaries of like what a gaming narrative and interactive experience and interactive storytelling can be. Like I'm really into that. There's a lot of really good ones. I'll say again, like there's a game called Outer Wilds, which is very confusing because there's also a game called The Outer Worlds, and it's not that game. That's
Okay.
like a space shooter, big budget game, but there's this indie game called Outer Wilds, which I think is like, honest to God, the most incredible interactive storytelling experience I've had from a game to date. It's just like, it's so great. I think everyone should go check it out. It doesn't get enough attention. It got overshadowed by this game, The Outer Worlds, but it's called Outer Wilds. Anyway.
Sure. Well, that's really high praise. I'll go check it out. One of the things that I was curious about too is, did you play video games growing up a lot, just like as a kid?
Definitely. A ton. I mean, I was a big Nintendo kid. I had an N64, it was my first one. And then I went to a garage sale with my dad and we bought a Super Nintendo and like an Atari. So I had all these vintage consoles. And then I had PS2, you know, I played a lot of PS2 games. And GameCube, I sort of went down the line as things happened, got a Wii, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of games growing up.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I find so interesting about the 8-bit big band is like, I feel like it is bringing big band and like that sound and the jazz idiom to an entire demographic of people who would normally like not like. My girlfriend Lydia, who we've been together for 5 years, so she's had her fill of listening to big band and jazz and stuff that she's just like, this is not nails on a chalkboard, certainly. Like, she has a very open mind when it comes to music, and she is a singer, but it just doesn't quite click for her. Like, we'll be listening to like a Pat Metheny group thing, and there'll be a Lyle Mays solo that's just like melting your face, and she'll just be like, yeah, this does nothing for me.
No, I don't get it. Yeah.
Right. But you know, every once in a while, like, I'll turn something on in the car and she'll be like, ooh, yeah, like this speaks to me. Like, that I feel like the same excitement. And one of the things that she said that about the other day, the latest one, was putting on Press Start and just like we were listening to it down, and she was like, ooh, this is super fun. Like, the second track, she was like, this is really fun. And I think it comes from a fact that it's like familiar and it's nostalgic. So was that like part of the idea of why, excuse me, why you wanted to do Big Band, was because like it spoke to you and both your childhood experience and also being inclusive to other people?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I wanted to do it first and foremost, like you're saying, is that this music is like in my bones forever and will always be there because it's just so part of my experience as a young person, which leads to the first point, which is like that exact sentiment is a really common thing through all the history of music. You know what I mean? So like before there was video game music, even just going back 100 years, people would go see Broadway shows and they'd have an experience contextualizing certain pieces of music that they would love. And so the music would stick with them because they had the experience of this music through a different medium. And then when they heard the music outside of the medium, they were like, I love this song. Because when they experienced it within the medium, they had a good time.
Yeah.
So, you know, Broadway songs became incredibly popular, and then jazz musicians could take them and interpret them and rearrange them. And people had an in, they had a way in because they knew the music, and they were like, wow, I knew it from this and I've never heard it like this. This is where I'm going to grab hold and understand and recontextualize. The same thing happened with people who are like lovers of film scores. You know, maybe I guess a half generation later, people would see these movies and they'd hear certain songs or they'd hear certain themes that were iconic to their experiences of the films that they loved, and then they would love that music.
Yeah.
Regardless. People go to concerts, they have an incredible concert experience, they hear the songs, you know, it's a subconscious and a conscious thing, they love it. Same thing with video game music. So we're looking at these bodies of music that people have experiences with in formative times in their life that then aggregate to a collection of people from a generation having a shared experience through a body of work, right? And that's what we have now with video game music, in the same way that we have Broadway shows, film scores, the Great American Songbook. It's like a collective experience of a physical medium that isn't music, that has music that people experienced in tandem, right? And so that brings a whole new common body of knowledge that then we can reinterpret and play around with, and people are like, wow, I love this theme. This theme excites me, and it's my way into people reinterpreting it. This is tried and true. This is the tried and true path for music. This is how it works. Yeah. And because of video games, we have a whole new generation of people that we can do this with. That being said, what's really interesting about that, which we have in jazz, which we now have in video game music, is there is now a scene separate from the actual games of people who just like video game music. And they, people talk about video game music like it's a genre. People talk about, oh, I like show tunes. I love Broadway. I love the genre Broadway. But in reality, they're not actually genres of music. Broadway shows, film scores, video games are delivery vehicles with which we take all genres of music and we dramatize them for the use of storytelling within those vehicles. So when people are like, well, I love video game music, that's actually great because it means they love so many different genres of music. And what puts it all together is that it functions as game music and they love that. And so what that means is you now have younger video game music fans that are like, oh, I love Bob on Battlefield from Super Mario 64.
Yeah.
It was out way before I was born. Like they didn't experience that as a kid. They're experiencing that now as a video game music fan. It's like you and me. It's like, oh, I love all the things you are. And it's like, I didn't see that musical in 1920, whatever, in 1930, like I just love the song because we love jazz, and because we love jazz, as we learn these songs now. Sure. So that's what we're getting with video game music.
Yeah, where it's kind of this both for the people who did
very warm for May. That's what the show that song is from is called.
Yeah, right. But yeah, you're right. Like for one generation, it's moving forward, knowing like, oh yeah, I know this and here it is now. And the other, it's like moving backwards and kind of like retracing steps to figure out why we like it as it is. I'm so glad that you said all of that stuff because that was literally in my notes, like almost verbatim of what I was going to ask you. I was going to say, it feels like people would have the same exact feeling of following a narrative of a Broadway show that they would at an 8 Big Band show, because instead of seeing a narrative on a screen, they're having flashbacks of their childhood, maybe something that they had completely forgotten about.
Right, totally. Yeah, that's true. And also, what you're also touching on a really great point about like what it is to arrange both of those styles for me, because when you look at a Broadway show or a film, anything that is like, you're creating music to elevate the drama of a situation. What you're doing is you're drawing inspiration from what you're seeing on stage or on screen in order to like decide orchestrationally what you want to do. In a Broadway show, you have your composer who writes the songs, and then functioning as orchestrator, you sort of take their line drawing and you say, okay, I see what you're getting at. You're playing the piano and the guitar. You're singing your song. I'm going to run with this as far as I possibly can, the direction that you want to give it the vibe and the feeling and the sound and the contour through the song, the ups and downs of the song, the storytelling, the peaks and the valleys, the texture shifts, the louds, the softs, the brights, the darks, the sort of like groove, the ambient, all these like opposites I'm talking about, which are the parameters we do when we arrange music. Sure. So this is a skill that was really easily transferable to video game music, because classic video game music is so short and so limited in its ability to make sounds. They're often like 45 seconds to a minute long. There's only 3 notes at one time, and you're talking about the 8-bit era. And so these composers had not that much to work with technologically with which to pack in a lot of melodic and harmonic and rhythm information. So the skill to take their building blocks, which are already great, and run with them as far as I possibly can in whatever direction I want to artistically is like a skill that is directly transferable from Broadway shows to arranging this video game music,
Yeah. Whoa. Yeah. I'm also curious to know specifically with like the music, like you were saying that the music is a delivery vehicle, right? Or like it's part of a delivery vehicle for the video game. So whenever you take like these tunes and you have like a little bit more liberties with your arrangements, or you're doing it in the style of such and such, like the new single right from Portal 2, that is taken from the Nelson Riddle Almost I've Got You Under My Skin vibe, with that motif at the very beginning. Same thing with is it Stay Alive?
Still Alive.
Still Alive.
Yeah.
Still Alive. Thank you. I think Stay Alive is a like shitty 2007 horror movie with Frankie Muniz. Anyways,
as opposed to Staying Alive, which is the Bee Gees. Yeah.
Right. But then like that one has like the classic like Got the World on a String motif as well. But then like you'll also do certain things where you put it in the style of like a John Philip Sousa march, Right. So is there any like parameter in which you're like, okay, like I want to use this, I want to use this, I want to use this, but I kind of stay within here? Or are you just like, no, I if I want to do something that is, obviously this is the most like brash example of this, but like if you were like, I want to do something that's reminiscent of like super experimental like 20th century composers, obviously that would alienate some of our audiences. But do you feel that feeling of like nothing's off limits? Let me just find what works and sounds good.
Yeah, I mean that is definitely true because like you're saying, this isn't for a job. This is like whatever I want to do, which is great. So there's nothing off limits as far as I can tell. The big overarching rule is there has to be a dramaturgical justification to why the arrangement is doing any of those particular things.
Sure.
Right. So there has to be like an idea as to why that happened. So there's sort of like a couple ways I go with that. The easiest one and the most normal one is saying like, okay, well, this composer, if they had the tools, they would have chosen this genre, and now I'm going to run with it as far as possible. So for like the Chocobo theme, there's a version in Final Fantasy VI that like sounds very surfy. And so I was like, okay, that's fantastic. So I'm going to do a version that like takes that to the extreme. So it's like fully surf rock, but also like other 60s style writing, these sort of like 60s pop with like Farfisa organs and like that style of horn playing and writing. And like, and then I'm going to like pull in these Miserlou quotes and these Walk Don't Run and like these other surf quotes. And so it's like, I see what you're going for. And now I'm really going to go super hard with it as far as I can. And because doesn't have to function within a game anymore, it needs to be able to tell its own story because there's no visual, of course. So then it's like, what elements can I bring in to make it a journey? That's situation number one.
Yeah.
Situation number two, like you're saying, is where I totally like scrap the song except for its most raw building blocks, which are like its melody and its lyrics and some of its chord changes, and then recontextualize it in a completely new way. And that usually is something that just sort of it happens in a flash, like out of nowhere. It's sort of like you have this soup of arranging knowledge in your head where you're like, I love Frank Sinatra and I love Portal. And one day in the shower, those two things go together and you're like, oh, like what if Portal had come out in 1956, and like Frank Sinatra was like, oh, I want to sing that. What would that be like? So then it's like you have this idea, this like dramaturgical idea that you start with, as opposed to just being like, let me shoehorn. The easiest thing to do with the 8-bit big band would be like, okay, I'm going to take every video game music theme and make it swing, and like shoehorn everything into swing and big band. But that to me feels forced. It's like, if there's a reason why this should become this other genre, if you can justify it, if you have a direction, then it sort of like unlocks all the other ideas. And then it was like, okay, well, if Frank Sinatra had played Portal and loved this song, he would have called Nelson Riddle. And so Nelson Riddle would have done what? Let's try and imagine. And the funny thing about that arrangement is the Miss Maisel stuff that I was working on, I was doing these big band mock-ups. And one of them was they wanted What a Wonderful World, but in the style of I've Got the World on a String. And so I was working on like, I didn't arrange that. Bill Elliott, a great orchestrator and arranger, did, and I was producing the mock-up. And he did a great job of fusing the two things. And so I had that Nelson Riddle thing in my brain, and I was playing Portal or like trying to think of what to do with Still Alive because I always wanted to do it. And I was like, oh, it just like happened to click at the time.
Sure.
And I was like, oh, that's totally how Frank would have done it if he had played Portal,
Yeah. I think that the thing that you were stressing on too, with like, okay, you can go anywhere, any which way you want with it, within reason, as long as you have like a specific idea or something that you can latch on to that maybe was like a small nuance, and then you can like expand upon that. I think that is really the difference between like we were talking about at the beginning, like the real thing where it's like, no, this feels good, this feels right, it feels like, for lack of a better word, like official, as opposed to something that feels like gimmicky, like whenever, because we've all heard like a Van Halen song with a swing beat behind it, and it's just like, isn't this
for what reason, for what purpose?
Exactly. And it's really just like, that's why I've strayed away from, I band lead a big band down here in Austin. And, I've had venues say, oh, if you could just do more, and I'm not saying any which opinion about this, but if they're like, if you could do more of like the postmodern jukebox stuff where people know the tunes and just like do this, do that, then
all the time to me.
we would love
literally the same.
Yeah, and they're like, we would just love it. And again, no disrespect to those people, but it kind of has become this like standard for certain people where they're like, oh, like jazz is a museum piece for us, and let's just take some other tunes and put it in. And we're not going to book it all the time, but maybe every once in a while when we want our patrons to like put on a suit, then, and it just feels like so cheap but to their credit, from a manager's or creative director at a certain venue, at the end of the day, it's about money and they want to get people in the door. So I understand from the pressure of like the higher up who's just like, do whatever you need to do to make the numbers work, right? And obviously people are going to look at things that are hot in the market and try to replicate that in a vacuum. However, that's why I've been very hesitant to do any of those kind of arrangements, except lately I've found a way to make things like, this is kind of an overdone one, but like Human Nature really work in a big band setting that's like really hip, and like Crazy, like the Gnarls Barkley thing. Again, these are really famous tunes that have been covered a million times, but I think like a big part of it is like, yeah, somebody can bastardize a tune 1,000 times, but it just takes one arrangement for you to view it maybe a little bit differently.
Right. And I think also the training I got from theater that can transfer that really easily is like, we're talking about songs, right? So if you can find a way to take the lyric of that song and marry it with a genre that supports the drama of that lyric, then that's the through line that will make a quality arrangement and will make it work and not just be a gimmick. It's all about lyric and recontextualizing the lyric to make a different point, have a different point of view, but still a valid point of view,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Man, well, I also want to be respectful of your time as well. So just a couple more questions. What was it like to work on, being that you love video games, you play video games all the time? What was it like to be able to work on something like Red Dead Redemption, right? Where it's like, now I'm playing it.
Yeah, that was very cool. Yeah. I had no idea. First of all, I'm playing drums on that, which is so bizarre. So if you go into the theater I played the game, and now I can't remember what, Saint Denis, it's like the New Orleans area. There's like a theater where there's like these circus performers, and I'm actually playing drums. We're like part of the house band. Man. We didn't do motion capture or anything. Our piano player ended up doing motion capture for all the piano playing in the game. Whoa. I got a call from my friend Josh Plotner. He got hit up just via his website by Rockstar, and they're like, we just need a band to come in and record some music. And he was like, okay, no sheet music, nothing. They were like, we're just going to show you the animation of a sword twirler, and we just need you to improvise what they would have done in like the fucking turn of the century. And we were like, okay, we'll try. And like our trumpet player Danny was playing a cornet, and like, and we were just like literally making up these rags basically on the spot. It was incredible. It was something really incredible, like collective improvising. It was pretty amazing.
That's got to be like at the same time like very cool, because it's like, oh, like I can do anything that I want, and especially whenever you're with musicians who are of like that utmost caliber, who can just like pull that out of nowhere. That's really fun, but also that can be a very like intimidating thing. And another, like, this is not exactly the same kind of example, but we've played gigs before where, the client has called me and they're like, hey, I've got an event next Thursday, 6 to 9. I'm like, okay, great. What do you want us to play? And they're like, oh yeah, just like the Charleston. I'm like,
the Charleston.
Okay. I'm like, what else would you like? And they're like, oh, just things like the Charleston. And it's like, I was like, do you want like, things that Ella Fitzgerald might, because like for people who are not as adept, you give things that they might know. They're like, do you want things that like Ella Fitzgerald would sing? And they're like, yeah, but definitely not Frank Sinatra. And it's like, okay. And it's like kind of, this is, right. This is a little off topic, but several years ago I was playing this place in like the afternoons. I would like to go over, and my parents would kind of like make me do this as a child, and it's kind of carried over. I like to go and play at some of like the assisted living places, because it's just like that could be the one thing that like makes them like perk up and be like, oh,
Totally.
Here's the music that was popular whenever, such and such. And there's been some like amazingly beautiful stories where people have come up and said, that was my husband's song. He's been gone for
Wow.
several years. And that's very beautiful. But there was one that we played on like a Friday at 1 p.m. before our club date. And this woman, we're playing standards, and we're not playing anything out. I mean, we're playing like all the stuff that we know they want to hear, which is like excruciating sometimes, but it's like, Come Fly With Me, all of
Right.
me, East of the Sun. I love East of the Sun, but we're playing tunes like that. And they keep shouting out, Little Brown Jug or like In the Mood, but it's a duo. So it doesn't make sense to be playing, In the Mood with a duo.
Yeah.
And so we end up asking them, we're like, well, what would you like to hear? And they were like, not jazz. We hate jazz. And I was like, okay, well, that's more of a like thing on the booker's side that maybe they shouldn't have booked us to come here. And then I was like, well, what would you like to hear, just to see if I could appease her? And she was like, big band. And I was like, all right. I don't think there's any.
That's so interesting. There's so much to unpack there. You know what I mean?
Right. But anyways, so to get off of that, one of the last questions I have is like for you to be able to infuse all of these different things from like 60s pop and then like Philip Sousa March, just like classical stuff to current day stuff, all this different these influences that you put into the 8-bit big band and Broadway big band arrangements. What are you listening to just on a daily basis? Because you have to have like a very wide palette of music to be able to pull from and include all of those. So what do you find yourself listening to on any given day?
She's truly everything, anything and everything. I mean, any kind of world music I can get my hands on, going through phases of listening to various classical composers, jumping to different big band arrangers, jumping to bands. It's truly all right now. I have a whole playlist of I'm really into called it's all like 60s orchestral light music,
Okay.
which is like sort of slowly working its way into 8-bit big band charts.
Yeah.
Particularly the EP of Animal Crossing music I released. I've been listening
cool.
to a lot of 60s orchestral light music, and so there's a ton of that stuff on the Animal Crossing. And it's all like super playful orchestral. Like if you've ever watched It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, it's like all the music from that is this. And there's just a ton of that stuff. And I find it orchestrationally be really interesting because they all paint such a picture because they're all like program music for like commercials and stuff like this. So it's like really interesting to listen to from a arranging perspective. And the arranging and the writing is so good. I have this, and I've also been listening to a lot of like, just that era of arrangers. So like Esquivel, and people who are like definitely check out Esquivel. He uses like wild instruments in all sorts of weird ways within the orchestra and big band. And like, it's like big band with pedal steel, but for like effects only. And like,
cool.
Lots of cool vocal effects and, just all this sort of like 60s, what would be called space age bachelor pad music, and it's all like, they're like getting into panning. So they're like, to show off your new hi-fi, it'll be like two orchestras, like one panned over there, one over there, and like like all this crazy panning and like the arranging is really, really cool and like evocative and really character-y, which I really like.
Out of anything that you're listening to, if there's like one like album or even just a track that you would suggest for people to go listen to, could be like your favorite thing of all time, could be just what you were listening today. What would you suggest?
Oh man, let's see what I listened to on Spotify most recently. Recently played. Okay, there's this album by this guy Quinnell Gaskin, and I don't know how I found it. He's like an incredible like New York jazz and gospel player, but he has this album of like all these gospel praise breaks basically, but they have like incredibly fat horn section writing on them. Like, like there must be like 8 or 9 horns. It sounds almost like if a big band was playing a praise break. I don't know if it is actually a full big band, but it's like, it sounds awesome.
That sounds
So that's
right
a
up
really
my
cool
alley.
album I found. I also keep a playlist called, I keep a playlist. If you go to my public Spotify profile,
Uh-huh.
there's like a playlist called Sonorous Surprises that has like hundreds of things on it of literally like anything I hear that I'm like, oh, I like that. I just throw it
Yeah.
on there.
Okay.
So it goes like all over the map, genre wise. And yeah, I don't know, just literally like anything I can find that's unique.
Sure. Cool. Well, the last question, the way I end every show is musicians across the board have crazy gigs from hell stories where things just went totally wrong. Could be anything from like in a Broadway show or just a private gig or
Yeah.
a club date.
Yeah.
What's your where things just went way up the wall? What's the craziest gig from hell?
Oh yeah, the one I always go to is one time I got electrocuted while I was conducting a show.
Whoa. How do you come back? How do you come back
It
from
was
that mid-show?
it was almost a disaster. I was like, this was in LA, and I was conducting a show, and it was like a 7-person pit, and I was conducting from the bass. I was playing bass,
Yeah.
and I was sitting on a steel stool, and we were in the middle of like a vamp, right? So like there's dialogue, and I was like counting a vamp, getting ready to go on, and there was like a cable under the stool that was a power cable for a light that sat on the control panel for the person who controls the set.
Uh-huh.
So the way it works is like when the stage manager is calling a show, each department has this little light that they turn on the light, and that's like, warning, we're about to fire this cue to move this set piece automatically, right? It's like automated. And when I turn the light off, that's when you press go and you move the set piece, right?
Okay.
And so that was powering that light. And so that light was on because he was getting ready. As soon as I called out of the vamp, the stage manager was going to call the move of the wall.
Yeah.
So the light was on, but the cord was under my steel chair. So I was sitting there conducting, and at that moment, my chair had eaten through the shielding of the power cable.
Oof.
And so it's just like a light bulb. So it's 120 volts. So it electrified my stool. And I don't know how this wiring happened, but when I touched my bass to call out of the vamp, it like electrified my hands, and I like couldn't move my hands.
Whoa.
And I was like, I can't. So I couldn't call out of the vamp. And so the singer just started like going on, but the singer didn't go on yet, but because the light had turned off because I cut the wire, the guy was like, oh, okay. And he called so then the wall started moving and the light started changing. And then the drummer stopped playing because he saw that the cable was on fire under my chair. So he got up and he was like, it's on fire. It's on fire. And I was like, keep playing.
And all the while you still can't move?
Yeah, I like can't move my hands. And so I just got up off my chair, and then it was like everything was fine.
Yeah.
And I like stepped on the cable to put the fire out. And the singer just started going on, and he was singing a cappella for like a couple bars, and then we just came back in when the show kept going. Yeah. So,
That's dedication, man, because like obviously the adrenaline's running and it's like, oh shit, there's nothing more stressful than like a production that like something where everything is working off of the next person, collaborating with each other. Like I still feel like most people would be like, oh, I need a minute, but it's like, no time.
Keep going. And I'm sure if the stage manager had known what was going on, she would have stopped the show. She would have been like, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we have to hold the show for a second. But there was no way for her to know, in the moment. By the time I could tell her, the show is already like resumed. So.
Yeah. Jesus. Well, Charlie, thank you so much for that story. I think that takes the cake. I thought last week was really insane where somebody was playing a gig for the cartel and was held hostage until sunrise, and then they had to go to play a church gig. Which that one definitely is crazy, but I think also being electrocuted and directing a show where you can't move your hands takes a bit of technique too. So do you have anything that you want to plug other than just website charlierosen.com and other things?
When is this coming out?
So this will come out probably the first or second weekend, or first or second Thursday of December.
Perfect. Okay, so I can plug this. You're the first person to know.
Okay, perfect.
Great. Well, first of all, the 8-Bit Big Band is coming out with a third album on January 8th, which is fantastic. It's probably like it's an incredible album. It's truly incredible. It's all over the place genre-wise. It's probably like the most well-produced thing I've ever made. That's whether you like it or not is subjectively totally up to you. But
Sure.
there's no denying that like the playing and the engineering and the mastering on this album are just like, it sounds incredible. Whether you like the arrangements or not is up to you. But it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
It's such an incredibly well-produced album. So that's coming out on January 8th. It's called Backwards Compatible.
Okay.
And I can announce this here because it will be out after I've announced this publicly. On December 10th, we are doing an 8-Bit Big Band live stream from Sony Hall. So they rented out, we've rented out the entire venue of Sony Hall. It's this 500-seat theater. We're spreading out the full big band along the audience, plexiglass, masks. Everyone's getting a rapid test. We're streaming with 6 4K cameras and like 360 audio from Sony Hall. We're doing an 8-Bit Big Band live stream concert, multi-camera.
Holy shit, man. That is so exciting. Well,
by the time people hear this, tickets will be available on our website.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to be the first one, man, because that's going to be amazing. I assume, is it all of the people who were on the personnel of Backwards Compatible?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'd say even song to song, that personnel changed on Backwards Compatible.
Sure.
The band is like, from any given song is about 60 to 65% the same as the last song.
Okay.
You know, because what we do is we record like, oh, we have a session this month, we're recording 3 tunes, and then we won't have one for another couple months. So like, we don't always get the same people every time, you know?
Sure.
But it's like generally 60 to 65% the same people. Yeah. So you can expect a lot of familiar names and a couple new names, you know? Okay.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm super excited, and we'll make sure once you announce it publicly, I'll make sure to announce it in the weeks leading up.
We're planning on announcing it on the 10th, so we get a month, the 10th of this month. Yeah. So yeah.
Sounds good. Well, Charlie, man, I can't tell you again how much I appreciate you taking the time. And
my pleasure.
Next time I'm up there, I try to make it up there like two times a year, but obviously with COVID, things are a little bit different. But next time I'm out there, I would love to buy you a drink and
yeah, down.
Awesome.
I'll talk to you more soon, I'm sure.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Charlie. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye.